Hello, good day. Hope everyone's having a nice Sunday and maybe Monday if you are really far out in the Pacific. Um, yeah, so welcome to Philosophy Roulette number 84, where we read some philosophy papers and talk about them. Cool. So, you know what? I was looking at just going down the this Phil papers. These are just the recent ones. I also hooked up the my little search function for paperlink for Phil Archive. So let's take a look at that real fast. See if this works. So you see this right here. So now I can just look at the front page of Phil Archive and see what Phil Archive, which is really the aggregate of everything uploaded to Phil Papers, has. So there's all the recent additions to the Phil Star stuff. So we can look here, and this might help in getting a variety of papers. So just look here briefly and see if this is good. If not, we can always just go back to regular old Phil Papers and see what's new. So lots of stuff with no page counts, of course. Journal of Near-Death Studies. Look at that. It's 15 pages though, so let's see if it gets them a little shorter. The magazine article, the Philosopher's Magazine. I don't know, maybe it's I shouldn't bias it by saying it's magazine. I just don't know about I haven't really heard about the journal article. So let's take a look real fast. Yeah, see, his thoughts, new waves in Anglo-Chinese philosophy. So that's kind of cool. So this is a, I guess not a research paper. We gotta figure out how to distinguish between, like, there's a very hard break between like research things that are used for like tenure and then like everything else, and it's not entirely clear where that line is. It's part of the things I worry about in the public philosophy. What exactly is the public? And I have no idea, because it's very hard to actually pin that sort of thing down. I got 10 pages on Journal of Value Inquiry, and I know it's here because that's the whole point of it being on this page. It's all the stuff that Phil Papers has. So maybe look at that one in a minute. That says it's 10 pages. That's kind of cool. We've got 11 pages. Against the Ritual of Is and Ought. Don't know what that means. I'll click on the button. Southwest Philosophy Review. Socratic Oblivion and the Siren Song of Academe. I mean, this one is 5 pages as a response paper, though, but hey, we can open up all these things and see what we got. Aesthetica, the philosophical significance of Wittgenstein's experiments on rhythm, Cambridge, 1912 to 13. Huh. So this is music. Aaron Guter, when I was at BU, was a grad student at BU. So he was getting his PhD with Hintica, and he was studying Wittgenstein on music. And I had him for philosophy like 101 or something. My most pleasant memory of Aaron actually was BU had this class like something like reason and argumentation. It was a 100 level course in basic logical and like sort of reasoning stuff. So it was like little logic, little just like argumentative stuff, basic how people think good arguments are put together. And it was taught by Hintica, and Hintica, he was old at this point, and he was his position on logic was that you can't really expect the kids to understand the logic, so he wanted us to like sort of use the logic to reason well. That was sort of the point of the course. And so he'd give us a cheat sheet on how the logical forms works, because it wasn't so important that we memorized how the De Morgan conversions worked, but that we could apply them. So then he was making up his test. He forgot what was on his cheat sheet, and he put stuff that was on his cheat sheet on the test. And so I raised my hand to Aaron. I'm like, "Are you serious?" And he like looks at it, like he then looks closer, and he's like, he just like face palms and walks away. So yeah. So, 15 pages aren't. Well, let's take a look. I don't want to read 15 pages. Maybe if it's double spaced. No. This is gonna be a pain in the butt to read. Sorry, Aaron. Shucks. Alright. This is 11. This one is 7. This one is 5. But it's hey, I've been liking the response papers, so let's take a look at this. And Southwest Philosophy Review is this is, wow, it's even 4 pages basically. Is this even a, is this just, okay, so this is a, this is just an introductory paper. Okay, so that's fine then. Okay, so who is this and why are we reading this? This is Socratic Oblivion and the Siren Song of Academe, responding to Anne-Marie Schultz stirring up America's sleeping horses. So, yeah, we can change the zoom on this at some point so you can, I don't know, I kind of like how big the letters are. What are you going to do? If you join me live, you can grab the paper easily by typing !paper in the chat box, and this link will pop back up again. So please do one day. Cool. Okay, we're up and running. Alright, so GM Trujillo and Terrell Taylor, Vanderbilt Peoples. Anne-Marie Schultz wants philosophy to both attend to social justice and to engage with public audience and public thinkers like Ta-Nehisi Coates. She justifies her position by lauding Socrates as portrayed in Plato's Apology, dubbing him a public intellectual, and celebrating his commitment to Perugia. Oh, cool. Public philosophy discussion. I like that. Let's see. Socratic Oblivion. Who knows what that's going to turn out to be. We largely agree with these goals, but ethics and politics flourish and flounder in the subtleties of the empirical world, and we find problematic both the sanitized version of Socrates and the uncontextualized version of Coates. Stated plainly, 1. Socrates is a poor model for any socially engaged intellectual, and 2. Coates must be placed within the history of black literature and philosophy in the United States. This means that calling Coates Socratic is not univocally positive, and comparing Coates to Socrates inflates his reputation and ignores a history of black thinkers that deserve equally serious engagement. Socratic Oblivion. Socrates deserves some praise. Even though he synthesized and revised ideas from Xenophanes and Pythagoras, not to mention Homer and Hesiod, he represents a qualitative shift in intellectual history and systematic inquiry of the world. He used the Greek language and culture to make new words like philosophia. He refined cultural concepts like eretai and eudaimonia. And rather than fight, Socrates preferred conversation, describing himself as a midwife of ideas who tends to men's souls. He even allowed women to be full guardians in the Callipolis, remarkable considering Greece's misogyny. He took no payment for his services, and he lived his convictions to the death. He embodied integrity. I don't know if he embodied integrity, but he definitely did something along something or other. I mean, he did get killed for corrupting the youth. But we should not sanitize Socrates, discarding his flaws into oblivion. Whitewashing important figures causes precisely the harm Schultz wants to correct, the harm that Coates emphasizes in American history. Socrates had more than a little macho man in him, serving as a hoplite and relishing the idea. And despite allowing women to be full gardens, his status as feminist is questionable, often conceding that women are empirically inferior to men, and that everyone is subservient to the state. Moreover, even if we examine only the early dialogues like the Apology, we find a pattern of Socrates only talking to prominent men, whom he repeatedly annoyed. Then he allowed himself to be captured, tried, and executed. He trusted the system. He begged obedience to it and justified its capital punishments. In Socrates' words and deeds, we find outright contradictions, like Socrates saying we ought neither to fear death nor weigh it heavily in our considerations, yet also arguing he did not lead a public life because he needed to survive. We find a man who neglects his household and friends, and who fails to compromise or find alternatives in his way of arguing and his way of facing justice. Moreover, we find little discussion of slavery, despite there being periods in Greek history where there were as many as a dozen slaves for each free person. Socrates is a mixed bag. If conviction and execution are the standards for success, then so much the worse for failure. Moreover, Socrates should have known better because Anaxagoras was tried and exiled for impiety before him, as Aristotle would later face too. We ask our audience not to be lured by the Siren song of Socrates that sings that you can convince people through uncompromising reason. Plain speech cannot accomplish all goals, especially not in politics, and neither education nor votes can be won by refusing to meet audiences where they are or failing to adjust strategic action to circumstances. Socrates was a great philosopher, but he was a lousy activist and public intellectual. He annoyed almost every influential person in Athens, thus burning politically useful bridges. He questioned people to the point of aporia and gave few positive answers, thus failing to establish a clear educational program. And when his movement needed him most during Athens' turmoil, he decided execution was preferable to escape and continued strategy in action. Given this reality, why would anyone want to call Coates Socratic? Okay. Prophets or specimens. Additionally, why hold Coates as an exemplary public intellectual? Absent the popularity of his genre of public discourse, or even absent a historical focus, it is questionable to celebrate Coates rather than thinkers like Charles Blow or Jamie Bowie. By focusing exclusively on Socrates and Coates, Schultz's framework misses key figures and distorts Coates through a Socratic lens. By neglecting developments between Socrates and Coates, she avoids engaging in the public tradition that informs African American politics and thought in the 20th century. Schultz does cite Cornel West's Democracy Matters, but she pays no attention to his more recent book, Black Prophetic Fire, which lays out a black prophetic tradition moving through Frederick Douglass, W.E.B. Du Bois, Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and Ida B. Wells, not to mention the strivings of Medgar Evers, Fannie Lou Hamer, and Angela Davis. We must remember that thinking occurs outside the ivory tower in ways neither always inferior to the Academe nor necessarily legible to it. This means that engaging traditions takes work, and using the most obvious frameworks and figures risks neglecting the development, context, and deep meanings of works. Schultz's omissions are regrettable, especially because two definitive aspects of the prophetic tradition are speaking truth to power, the act of publicly challenging dominant modes of authority, and doing so fully aware of the significant moral consequences, both nice parallels to Parrhesia. The prophetic tradition thus merges theory and praxis. It offers an understanding of why one speaks and to what end one acts. Let's see. This is an interesting paper. I mean, I'm trying to, not my area, so I have a harder time commenting in a reasonable way. But I mean, just rhetorically, it's like you're looking at the Schultz's framework. They're saying basically it was just too narrow. It's only looking at two perspectives, and as such as overtly reduced the understanding that should have been had. So it's like, but I mean, I'm not entirely. I mean, there's always some sort of reduction. This is saying, well, you missed the bigger picture, missed the bigger picture. That doesn't really mean that Schultz was wrong for doing whatever Schultz did, because perhaps their conclusion is right, and that this sort of Socrates Coates version of the world is a good way to actually get there. Or it's the most efficient way to argue for what they want, even if in some sense it's like maybe not the best way in a larger context, but if it's sort of like you had to make the point in the amount of space you had, and this is one way to do it. And then someone's saying, well, look, you didn't really look at all these other perspectives. Well, yeah. It's like, yeah, I know I didn't. I didn't have the time, effort, or, like, wherewithal to do so. But, like, do you see where I got? Like, is that... It's like you're sort of, like, criticizing the details when you're missing the bigger picture. That's what if your Schultz is, like, reading this and saying, all right, look, you're missing the bigger picture here. It's like, yes, of course, all this other stuff is good, but... I mean, did you see my conclusion? Like, did I argue for my conclusion well? And is my conclusion the right thing? Now, I don't know what Schultz is, apparently, like, this is what got me thinking about it right here, because they're saying Schultz's omissions are regrettable because two definitive aspects of prophetic tradition. So, these are probably things Schultz was arguing for right here. And so, this author is saying, these authors are saying that Schultz, if had taken the wider perspective, then could have had a stronger argument for the conclusion. So I don't know. It's sort of this paper seems to be against the methodology. So it's a question of like, how do you actually get to the results you want? Continuing. Given this context, Coates is a controversial illustration of Schultz's points. He may speak to power, but he has no sense that action as critical towards an emancipatory project. He has no sense of that action as critical towards an emancipatory project. Towards the end of Being the World and Me, Between the World and Me, Coates advises his son, but you cannot arrange your life around them and the small chance that the dreamers coming into consciousness, our bodies are too precious, and you are here now and you must live. And there is so much out there to live for. He follows this with a discussion of the dark energies of the Mecca, the black social world as exemplified by Howard University, and of the grand celebration taking place there during homecoming, full of music, liquor, and dancing as sensual as a black woman in her tightest jeans, shaking as though she was not somebody's mama. Coates is clearly concerned with the worldly pleasures and offerings, specifically those of a black world surviving through the threat of white supremacy. But nothing at Howard University's homecoming resolves the contradiction of white supremacy within the United States, and Coates is okay with that. And while we cannot judge this position as abdication of duty with a fuller account of without a fuller account of black struggle, we can say that a fundamental difference exists between the social practices encouraged by Socrates and Coates. In fact, Cornel West expressed his discontent with Coates' writing and politics for reasons that reflect these differences. West notes that Coates has no affiliation with collective struggle and no analysis of concrete instances of inequality and oppression. More or less, West identifies that Coates has no intention of using his works to motivate or inform activism. Even even if Socrates were an effective public intellectual, which we challenged, Schultz would need to prove the same for Coates. Okay. Coates is a slippery thinker. As with any complicated figure, it is impossible to frame the entirety of his writing and actions in a single idiom. Even as Coates shies away from solutions of any sort, there are moments in his writing where he posits the possibility of America's reconciliation with its bloody history. Wow, I wonder if we're ever going to reconcile with our bloody history. It doesn't look like we have any desire to do so at this point. I mean, the possibility of it even seems rather slim at this point, and demonstrates and slavery's ever-potent specter. Yeah, we never get away from the stupid things we've done in this country. Yeah, so, I mean, at the moment, I was reading something recently on coronavirus, so it's like everyone was like praising China for how they handled the coronavirus so well. I mean, they were hard at first, but it took them really, if you were like really hard, really fast, it seems like you would have saved a lot of people. And then like Emmanuel Macron of France was just like, why do you even believe the Chinese? Like they're not telling the truth. Why would they tell the truth? And so it's like, yeah, all these people were like running to say, well, at least the Chinese had a better model. And it's like, well, he's just like, no, they didn't. They just lie better than you do. It's like, well, maybe that's good enough for the politicians, but it's completely not reconciling like what they're doing with like their history and their problems with and like we are just denying our problems for the same reasons. Like we're like looking at someone else and being like, oh yeah, everyone else is like, they do it better than us, why are you yelling at us? Anywho, we're gonna have a lot of troubles going forward with this coronavirus thing. But these difficulties demonstrate the wisdom of Ralph Ellison in his essay The World and the Jug, where he explains that attempts to pick the exemplary black writer and to position them as a champion render black persons as bugs collected in jars by children or livestock raised and appraised by farmers. Yeah. Attending to the work of black thinkers requires attending to the ways they have approached both the issues worth addressing and the writing worth reading. Schultz's rendering of quotes in a vacuum does not meet this threshold. Ye gadflies. Oh, why do people think this is... I'm getting more and more sour on this kind of idea of gadfly of Socrates. So where does this leave us? We hope with nagging discomfort. I like this phrase. That's a good phrase. Nagging discomfort. No. Nagging discomfort. Because what else is discomfort but nagging? So it's a particular kind of discomfort. We have been steering our fleet towards the Siren song of Academe, those seductive lyrics that tell us to self-interrogate and to assuage guilt and to name-drop thinkers outside of the canon of white cisgender, heterosexual, wealthy, powerful male philosophers. Another academic publication, another blog post, another op-ed column, another academic ship ruined on the rocky shore of slacktivism. We must resist the Socratic and academic Siren song by engaging seriously with the neglected philosophical tradition and thinkers like Sojourner Truth, Frederick Douglass, W.E.B. Du Bois, Anna Julia Cooper, and Ida B. Wells. We think Schultz would agree with us that mere writing is not enough. We need parents who send their children to public schools and make sure they get support for solid curricula and extracurricular activities. We need people monitoring local governments and their own church communities to squelch hate. We need people to give money and political power to people and causes that need it most. And if we neither talk to people unlike us nor persuade leaders to attend to justice, we must ask ourselves this: are we writing as a mere academic exercise, and what is that really worth? In sum, we must be more than public intellectuals. We must be gadflies. Yeah... No, I don't like gadflies. I really don't. I mean, this is going back to the sort of Socratic ideal that like you have to actually annoy people to get things done. I don't see how that is the right motto. I mean, okay, so this last paragraph is actually very cleverly written. This is reinterpreting the black history right here that you can see in all of this stuff as the best of Socrates, in that he would go through and like poke holes and like force people to like admit that they were wrong about stuff. And so the author here has actually has done like a clever synthesis of the Socratic ideal and the black intellectual history ideal together to make a call to activism. So this was well executed as a in terms of like the paper here. But yeah, but the problem is I still think this is I still think this is in the mistaken ideals of the sort of the old way of thinking. You don't want to be a gadfly. It didn't work in the past. And the fact that the black intellectual history has been ignored, just saying that we should do this is not actually giving a method of doing it. Like, it was a nice synthesis in the paper, but I don't think this paper, granted, it's only like, what is it, like, I mean, it was 4 pages. I mean, so I don't really have a legit complaint here. This is just sort of a call to arms, and it does not actually explain how to properly gadfly, as opposed to just the old model of it, which in the end it didn't work very well, as this author did mention earlier in the paper. So, I mean, yeah, I thought there was going to be 8 pages, but, like, this is, like, pages of notes here. Look at this. Very impressive amounts of notes and other stuff. Okay. It's like, yeah, look at all these notes. Alright, so the way forward, I mean, I think, as I mentioned earlier, I'm always worried about what is public philosophy. This is public philosophy here. I've gone out and trying to read philosophy papers on Twitch. So it's like, but this is the question. We must resist like here's the issue. Let me make this a little clearer what's going on in my head. We must resist the Socratic and academic siren songs. And how do you do that? By engaging seriously with neglected philosophical tradition. Okay. I mean, I'm sorry, but like engaging seriously with the neglected philosophical tradition just seems more academic. I mean, it's like, okay, there's always a thing. It's like, why is in the West do we always say, oh, we should go read some like Nagarjuna or something from one of the like Eastern traditions. So it's like, well, that's sort of still in the old model of thinking, and so it's like you can go get lost in the some other tradition and just be just as academic, but you'll just be academic in a different way. So I have a little question about like, is this strategy right here, does this actually make any sense? But whatever. It like I said, it turned out to be a 3-page paper really. So I don't think the solution was fine, but it was a very nice paper. Otherwise, I know it's cleverly written and well done. So as a call to arms, it was good. It was not like, but I mean, how much are you really going to get done in this amount of space? Okay, so that's it for this paper. I guess that's it for now. Have a good day, everybody, and I'll be back later. I usually take Mondays off, so I won't be back tomorrow, but I'll be back later today, and then I'll be back on Tuesday. Thanks, and be safe.